The smoke was so thick that Captain Elena Vasquez couldn't see her own gloved hands as she crawled through the collapsed doorway of apartment 4B. The building groaned around her like a dying giant, its wooden bones crackling and splitting in the superheated air that pressed against her mask with each labored breath. Somewhere in this maze of twisted metal and burning debris, a woman was trapped, alive according to the thermal imaging camera that had picked up her heat signature just minutes before the second floor gave way. "Captain, we've got maybe 3 minutes before the whole east wall comes down," crackled the voice of Lieutenant Rodriguez through her radio, barely audible over the roar of flames consuming the century-old tenement. Elena's jaw tightened as she pushed deeper into what had once been someone's home, now transformed into a hellscape of orange and black. The weight of 17 years on the job pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than the 60 pounds of gear she carried. At 39, Elena had seen more death than most people could imagine, had pulled more bodies from more fires than she cared to count, but she had also saved 847 lives. She kept track in a small leather notebook that lived in her locker, each name written in careful script, each rescue a small victory against the darkness that sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. Today felt different, though. Today felt like the universe was testing her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. The call had come in at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Elena had been in the station kitchen, making her daughter Sophia's favorite peanut butter and strawberry jam sandwiches for when she picked her up from school later. The bread was still warm from the toaster when the alarm bell shattered the quiet afternoon, and she had abandoned the half-made sandwich to slide down the brass pole that had become as familiar to her as the stairs in her own small house on Maple Street. Station 19 was her domain, her kingdom of red trucks and yellow gear, of brotherhood and sisterhood, forged in smoke and flame. She had worked twice as hard as any of her male colleagues to earn the captain's badge that now sat heavy on her chest, and she wore it with a pride that sometimes even surprised her. The men under her command, Rodriguez with his easy laugh and steady hands, Murphy, who could read a fire like sheet music, Chen, whose speed in suiting up was legendary, they followed her not because they had to, but because they trusted her judgment with their lives. The apartment building at 1247 Roosevelt Avenue had been burning for nearly an hour when they arrived, black smoke pouring from every window like the building was exhaling its dying breath. The red brick facade, once proud and stately, was now streaked with soot and cracked from the extreme heat. Elderly residents huddled in blankets across the street, their eyes wide with shock and loss, clutching photo albums and jewelry boxes and other small treasures they had managed to save. Elena had conducted the initial assessment with the efficiency that came from years of experience. The fire had started in the basement, electrical from the looks of it, and had climbed through the walls with a hunger that spoke of old wiring and decades of deferred maintenance. The first and second floors were fully engulfed, but the thermal camera had picked up signs of life in 3 different apartments. They had already evacuated 2 families from the 3rd floor when the stairwell collapsed, trapping whoever remained on the 2nd floor. That's when they had spotted her, a single heat signature in apartment 4B, motionless but alive, surrounded by flames that were growing hungrier by the minute. "I'm going in," Elena had announced, her voice carrying the authority that broke no argument. Rodriguez had started to protest, they all had, but she silenced them with a look. This was what she did. This was who she was. Now, crawling through air so hot it felt like breathing liquid fire even through her mask, Elena followed the thermal camera's guidance toward the back bedroom where the woman waited. The floor beneath her was soft with rot and fire damage, and she could feel it sagging with each movement. One wrong step, one moment of carelessness, and she would fall through to the flames below.
Beneath a heavy wooden dresser that had somehow shielded her from the worst of the collapse. Her dark hair was matted with debris, and her face was pale with smoke inhalation, but she was alive. Elena's trained eyes took in the scene in seconds. The woman wore a faded blue hospital scrub top and jeans, and there was a stethoscope draped around her neck that had somehow survived the chaos. A nurse, Elena realized. probably coming home from a long shift. On the nightstand beside the bed, protected by a thick photo frame that had cracked but not shattered, was a picture of the woman with two small children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 8 years old, both grinning gap-toothed smiles at the camera. Something twisted in Elena's chest as she looked at that photo. Those children would be in school right now, she realized, blissfully unaware that their mother's life hung by a thread in this burning building. Just like her own daughter Sophia, who was probably sitting in her 3rd-grade classroom learning about fractions or practicing cursive, trusting that her mom would be there to pick her up at 3:30 just like always. "I've got her," Elena radioed, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. She worked quickly to free the woman from beneath the dresser, checking for obvious injuries as she lifted her into the fireman's carry that had become second nature. The woman was petite, couldn't weigh more than 120 pounds, but dead weight was always heavier than it looked. The trip back was a nightmare of crumbling walls and superheated air. Twice, Elena had to change course when her planned route became impassable. The building was dying around them, its death throes violent and unpredictable. But Elena had navigated worse mazes, had carried heavier burdens, and had faced longer odds. She thought of Sophia's laugh, of the way her daughter's face lit up when Elena walked through the door each evening, still smelling of smoke and triumph. She thought of the woman's children, waiting somewhere for their mother to come home. When she finally emerged from the building, the woman clutched unconscious in her arms. The crowd that had gathered on the street erupted in cheers. Elena barely heard them. Her focus was entirely on getting her patient to the paramedics, on monitoring the weak but steady rise and fall of her chest, and on willing her to keep breathing until the medical team could take over. "Good work, Captain," said Rodriguez, as Elena gently transferred the woman to the waiting gurney. His dark eyes held the respect and admiration that Elena had earned incident by incident, rescue by rescue, over nearly 2 decades of service. Elena pulled off her helmet and ran a soot-stained hand through her short, practical haircut, dark brown with premature streaks of silver that she had stopped dyeing years ago. She was exhausted, her muscles aching from the weight and the heat, but there was satisfaction. Another life saved, another family that wouldn't have to face the unthinkable tonight. "I've got any ID on her?" Elena asked the paramedic who was now establishing an IV line. "Maria Santos," the paramedic replied, reading from the woman's driver's license. 34 years old, looks like she's a registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. Elena nodded, filing the name away in her mental catalog alongside all the others. Maria Santos. She would add it to her notebook later, number 848, in her personal ledger of lives preserved against all odds. As the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, Elena found herself wondering about Maria Santos. Was she married? Divorced? Did those children in the photo have a father waiting somewhere? Or was Maria facing the challenges of single parenthood that Elena knew all too well? Would Maria remember anything about the rescue? Or would it all be lost in the haze of smoke inhalation and trauma? "Captain?" Murphy's voice pulled Elena from her reverie. "Chief wants to see you. Says there's going to be a commendation for this one." Helena waved him off. She had a drawer full of commendations, medals, and certificates gathering dust in her small home office. What mattered wasn't the recognition. It was the knowledge that Maria Santos would go home to her children, would tuck them into bed tonight and read them stories and kiss their foreheads and take for granted all the small, precious moments that make up a life. The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork and debriefing, of hoses being rolled and equipment being cleaned and checked. It wasn't until Elena was driving to Sophia's school, her hair still damp from the station shower and her clothes still carrying the lingering scent of smoke, that she allowed herself to really process what had happened. She thought about Maria Santos, lying unconscious in that burning bedroom, trapped not just by debris, but by circumstances Elena could only imagine. What had brought her home in the middle of the day? Had she been working a night shift at the hospital? Was she a single mother, like Elena, juggling the demands of a high-stress job with the endless needs of children who depended on her for everything? Elena pulled into the parking lot of Lincoln Elementary just as the bell rang, and within minutes the building disgorged a flood of children in bright backpacks and untied shoes. Sophia emerged from the crowd like a ray of sunshine, her dark curls bouncing as she ran toward Elena's pickup truck. At 8 years old, Sophia had inherited her mother's determination and her late father's easy smile, and Elena felt her heart expand every time she saw her daughter's face light up with recognition. "Mama!" Sophia called as she climbed into the passenger seat, her small hands struggling with the seatbelt. "Mrs. Patterson said you're a hero. She saw you on the news, saving someone from a fire." Elena smiled as she helped Sophia with her seatbelt, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's strawberry shampoo and the lingering smell of school lunch and playground adventures. "Just doing my job, mija," she said, using the Spanish endearment her own mother had whispered to her as a child. "But you saved someone's life. That makes you a hero," Sophia insisted, with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Did she say thank you, the lady you saved?" "She was sleeping when I found her," Elena explained as she pulled out of the parking lot. "Sometimes when there's a lot of smoke, people fall asleep and don't wake up right away. But the doctors will take good care of her, and she'll be able to go home to her family soon." "Does she have kids like me?" And Elena felt that familiar tug in her chest, the one that came whenever she was reminded of how precious and fragile their small family was. "Yes, sweetheart, she has 2 kids who love her very much." That night, after Sophia was bathed and fed and tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed elephant, Elena sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had grown cold and stared at the notebook where she recorded her rescues. She opened it to a fresh page and carefully wrote, "Maria Santos, 34, nurse, mother of 2, apartment fire, Roosevelt Ave, unconscious smoke inhalation, rescued via bedroom window after stairwell collapse." But then she found herself writing more than usual. She wrote about the photo on the nightstand, about the children's gap-toothed smiles, about the way Maria's scrub top had been twisted from the heat and debris. She wrote about the weight of another person's life in her arms, about the trust that came with that weight, about the responsibility that followed her home every night and sat at her dinner table like an uninvited guest. Elena had been a single mother for 3 years now, ever since David's heart attack had stolen him away on an ordinary Thursday morning while Sophia played with blocks in the living room. She had learned to be both mother and father, to be strong enough for both roles while still allowing herself to be human enough to grieve and doubt and sometimes cry into her pillow after Sophia was asleep. The life insurance had paid off their small mortgage and left enough in savings for Sophia's education, but Elena kept working because she couldn't imagine doing anything else. This job, this calling, this daily battle against chaos and flame, it was as much a part of her identity as being a mother. She was good at it, maybe even great at it, and in a world that often felt uncertain and dangerous, there was comfort in knowing exactly what she was meant to do. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this one, Elena wondered what would happen to Sophia if something happened to her. David's parents lived in Arizona now, too old to take on an active 8-year-old. Her own parents had died in a car accident when Sophia was just a baby, and her sister lived in Portland with problems of her own. The thought of Sophia alone in the world, bounced between distant relatives or foster homes, was enough to make Elena's chest tighten with anxiety.
Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. She closed the notebook and set it aside, then walked to Sophia's room to check on her daughter one more time before bed. Sophia was curled on her side, her dark curls spread across the pillow like spilled ink, her breathing deep and even with the particular peace that came to children who felt completely safe in their world. Elena adjusted the covers and brushed a gentle kiss against Sophia's forehead, inhaling the sweet scent of childhood and innocence.
As she prepared for bed herself, Elena found her thoughts returning to Maria Santos. Was she awake now? Were her children by her bedside, relief and fear warring in their young faces? Or was she still unconscious, fighting her way back to a world where she was needed, where she was loved, where her absence would leave a hole that no one else could fill? Elena fell asleep thinking about heroism and motherhood, about the weight of other people's lives and the responsibility that came with being someone others depended on. She dreamed of smoke and flame, of children's laughter, and of a woman with dark hair who reached out from the shadows with gratitude shining in her eyes. She had no way of knowing that 3 weeks later, a letter would arrive in her mailbox that would change everything she thought she knew about rescue and redemption, about the connections that bind strangers together across the chaos of an ordinary life. She had no way of knowing that Maria Santos was already awake, already healing, already crafting words that would reach across the distance between their lives and touch something in Elena's heart that she didn't even know needed healing. The letter was already written, already sealed, already making its way through the postal system toward Elena's small house on Maple Street. And when it arrived, it would carry with it a truth so profound and unexpected that it would leave Elena sitting at her kitchen table with tears streaming down her face, understanding for the first time that sometimes the person doing the rescuing is the one who needs to be saved. But that was still 3 weeks away. Tonight, Elena slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the exhausted, while across the city, Maria Santos opened her eyes for the first time since the fire and whispered a single word into the darkness of her hospital room. "Thank you." Elena's alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m. every morning without exception, its red digital numbers glowing like tiny embers in the pre-dawn darkness of her bedroom. She had trained herself to wake on the first buzz, a habit born from years of fire station sleeping quarters where hesitation meant lives lost. Her feet hit the cold hardwood floor with practiced silence, and she moved through her morning routine with the efficiency of someone who had learned to pack a lifetime of care into the precious hours before her daughter woke. The house on Maple Street was small but sturdy, built in the 1940s with the kind of honest craftsmanship that Elena appreciated. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table for 2, and a living room dominated by Sophia's toy chest and art supplies. The mortgage was paid off now, one small blessing from David's life insurance, but the house felt simultaneously too big and too small. Too big when Elena lay awake at night, listening to the settling walls and wondering if she was enough. Too small when Sophia's energy filled every corner with the beautiful chaos of childhood. Elena's first stop was always the kitchen, where she started the coffee maker with movements so automatic they bordered on meditation. The machine was a wedding gift from David's mother, and despite its age and the way it gurgled and protested with each pot, she couldn't bring herself to replace it. Some mornings, if she closed her eyes while it brewed, she could almost pretend David was still there, still shuffling into the kitchen in his faded blue wrathboat to steal the first cup before she could claim it. While the coffee brewed, Elena stood at the kitchen window and watched Maple Street wake up. Mrs. Chen from next door always emerged at 5:45 to collect her newspaper, moving with the careful precision of someone in their 70s who refused to admit to fragility. Across the street, the Johnsons' porch light was already on. Mark left for his construction job by 6 a.m., and Elena often saw his silhouette moving behind the kitchen curtains as he prepared for his day. These people were her neighbors, but not quite her friends. Friendship required time and availability that Elena's life couldn't spare. There were pleasant exchanges over the backyard fence, waves from car windows, the occasional borrowed cup of sugar or an offer to collect mail during vacations, but the deeper connections, the kind where you called someone at 2 a.m. when you were scared or lonely or needed to talk through a problem, those had died with David. The coffee finished brewing just as Sophia's bedroom door creaked open. Elena heard the familiar shuffle of small feet heading to the bathroom, followed by the flush and the sound of toothbrushing that was always more enthusiastic than thorough. These morning sounds were the soundtrack of Elena's happiness, the proof that her world was still intact despite everything it had weathered. Morning sunshine,
Elena called softly as Sophia padded into the kitchen, her dark curls sticking up in every direction and her favorite purple pajamas twisted from sleep. "Morning, Mama," Sophia replied around a yawn, climbing onto the chair that Elena had positioned precisely to reach the table. At 8, Sophia was fiercely independent in some ways. She could pack her own backpack and brush her own teeth and choose her own clothes with opinions that brooked no argument. But in the mornings, she still moved with the drowsy vulnerability that reminded Elena she was still very much a little girl. Elena poured orange juice into Sophia's favorite cup, the one with the cartoon Firefighter that Sophia had picked out herself, and set out the ingredients for breakfast. Mornings were always the same: scrambled eggs with cheese, toast with strawberry jam, and a piece of fruit that Sophia would negotiate over like a tiny diplomat. The routine was comforting in its predictability, a small island of normalcy in lives that had been shaped by loss and responsibility. "Are you working today?" Sophia asked, though she already knew the answer. Elena worked a 48-hour shift rotation, 2 days on, 4 days off, and Sophia had memorized the schedule with the precision of someone whose security depended on knowing where her only parent would be at any given moment. "Yes, baby, but Mrs. Patterson will pick you up from school, and I'll see you tomorrow night when I get home," Elena replied, cracking eggs into the pan with practiced ease. She tried to keep her voice light, but she knew Sophia could hear the guilt that lived just beneath the surface. Every parent struggled with the balance between providing for their children and being present for them, but single parents carried that guilt with compound interest. "Will you fight any fires today?" Sophia asked, and Elena heard the mixture of pride and worry that had become familiar over the years. Sophia understood that her mother had an important job, a job that helped people and saved lives. But at 8 years old, she also understood enough to know that important jobs sometimes meant dangerous situations. "Maybe," Elena answered honestly. She had learned early in Sophia's life that sugarcoating the reality of her work only created more anxiety in the long run. "But you know Mama is very careful, and I have the best team in the world to keep me safe." Sophia nodded solemnly, then brightened as Elena set the plate of eggs in front of her. "Can I visit the station this weekend?" "We'll see," though she both knew the answer was yes. Sophia loved the fire station, with its gleaming trucks and friendly firefighters who treated her like a beloved mascot. The men and women of Station 19 had embraced Sophia as their honorary little sister, and Elena was grateful for the extended family they provided, even if she sometimes worried about Sophia becoming too attached to people who might not always be there. The drive to Lincoln Elementary was 8 minutes of morning traffic and radio news, Sophia chattering about a science project on volcanoes and a friend's upcoming birthday party. Elena listened with half her attention while the other half ran through the mental checklist that governed her days. Was Sophia's backpack packed with everything she needed? Did she have lunch money? Was her asthma inhaler in the front pocket where she could reach it? Had Elena remembered to sign the permission slip for next week's field trip? Single parenthood was an endless series of lists and contingencies, of backup plans for backup plans. Elena had to be organized in ways that had never come naturally to her, had to think 2 steps ahead at all times. If Sophia got sick at school, Elena would have to leave work, and who would cover her shift? If Elena got hurt on the job, who would pick Sophia up? If there was a natural disaster or emergency, who would care for Sophia if Elena couldn't get to her? These questions followed Elena everywhere, a constant low-grade anxiety that she had learned to manage but never eliminate. She envied the married mothers at school pickup who could divide responsibilities, who had partners to share the worry and the planning. She envied families where one parent could stay home sick with a child while the other maintained the income. She envied the simple luxury of having someone else who loved Sophia as much as she did. After dropping Sophia off at school, Elena drove to Station 19 with the morning news playing stories of house fires in neighboring counties, of budget cuts affecting emergency services, of political battles over funding for first responders. She turned the radio off when the familiar knot of frustration began forming in her chest. Elena loved her job fiercely, but she was tired of having to fight for resources, tired of explaining why fire departments mattered, tired of watching good people leave the service because the pay wasn't enough to support their families. Station 19 stood at the corner of 3rd and Main like a red brick fortress, its bay doors gleaming in the morning sun. Elena had pulled into this parking lot almost every working day for 17 years, had walked through those doors in every season and every weather, in times of triumph and tragedy, and the grinding routine of ordinary days. The station was her second home, her sanctuary, her place of purpose in a world that sometimes felt chaotic and unpredictable. The morning briefing was conducted in the station's kitchen around a scarred wooden table that had witnessed countless meals and conversations and late-night debriefings. Lieutenant Rodriguez read from the previous shift's report: 2 medical calls, 1 false alarm, routine maintenance on Engine 19. Captain Murphy presented the day's weather forecast and discussed fire danger levels. Elena assigned duties and reviewed safety protocols with the attention to detail that had kept her crew intact through 17 years of dangerous work. But underneath the professional routine, Elena found her thoughts drifting to Maria Santos. 3 days had passed since the apartment fire, and Elena had called St. Mary's Hospital twice to check on her patient's condition. Both times she had been told that Maria was stable and recovering, but hospital policy prevented them from sharing more detailed information with non-family members. Elena understood the policy, but part of her yearned to know more. How was Maria coping with the trauma? Were her children handling the separation well? Did she remember anything about the rescue? Elena had always maintained professional boundaries with the people she rescued. It was easier that way, cleaner, less emotionally complicated. She saved lives, they recovered, everyone moved on. Getting too invested in individual cases was a recipe for burnout, and Elena had seen too many good firefighters flame out because they couldn't learn to let go. But something about Maria Santos had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was the photo on the nightstand, those 2 children with gap-toothed grins that reminded Elena of Sophia's innocence and vulnerability. Maybe it was the nurse's scrubs that suggested a life spent caring for others, a professional kinship that Elena recognized. Or maybe it was simply the weight of carrying another person's unconscious body to safety, the intimate trust that came with literally holding someone's life in your hands. The morning passed in routine tasks, equipment checks, training exercises, paperwork that seemed to multiply faster than Elena could complete it. She supervised Rodriguez as he tested the hydraulic systems on the ladder truck, reviewed Murphy's inspection of the breathing apparatus, and conducted a walkthrough of the station to ensure everything was in proper order. Leadership in the fire service meant constant vigilance, endless attention to details that could mean the difference between life and death in an emergency. Lunch was interrupted by a medical call, an elderly man having chest pains at a downtown office building. Elena rode with the crew but let Rodriguez take the lead, using the call as a training opportunity for the younger firefighter. The patient was stable by the time they arrived, and the paramedics transported him to the hospital with what appeared to be a minor episode. But Elena found herself wondering if Maria Santos was still at St. Mary's, if she was walking the same hallways where this man would be treated, if their paths might cross in the maze of medical bureaucracy. The afternoon brought another medical call, this one more serious, a construction accident where a worker had fallen from scaffolding and suffered what appeared to be internal injuries. Elena worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize the patient while the paramedics prepared for transport. But the whole time she was thinking about Sophia's school pickup, about who would collect her daughter if this call ran long, about the endless juggling act of single parenthood. It was 4:30 p.m. when they finally returned to the station, and Elena immediately called Mrs. Patterson to check on Sophia. Her daughter was fine, already working on homework at the kitchen table of their neighbor who had become Elena's most reliable backup. Mrs. Patterson was a retired teacher who had raised 3 children of her own and understood the challenges of single parenthood better than most. She charged Elena far less than her services were worth, and Elena repaid her with homemade dinners and yard work and the kind of gratitude that could never be adequately expressed.
"Sophia's doing great," Mrs. Patterson assured Elena over the phone. "We're making cookies for her class party tomorrow. She's very proud that her mama is a hero, you know. She tells everyone about the lady you saved." Elena smiled, despite the exhaustion that had been creeping up on her all day. Sophia's pride in her work was both a blessing and a burden. Elena loved that her daughter understood the importance of service, but she sometimes worried about the pressure it created. What if Sophia expected Elena to always be heroic, always be perfect, always be enough? The evening brought 2 more calls, a minor fender bender with no injuries, and a gas leak that turned out to be a false alarm. By the time Elena's shift ended at 6 a.m. the following morning, she was operating on adrenaline and coffee, her body protesting the demands of a job that required physical strength, mental acuity, and emotional resilience in equal measure. She drove home through streets that were just beginning to wake up, past houses where families were starting their morning routines behind lit windows. Elena envied those glimpses of domestic normalcy, parents sharing coffee while children ate cereal, couples dividing responsibilities with casual efficiency, the simple luxury of having someone else who shared the load. Sophia was still asleep when Elena arrived home, and she stood in her daughter's doorway for a long moment, watching the peaceful rise and fall of small shoulders under princess-themed pajamas. At 8, Sophia was beginning to lose some of the baby softness that had made Elena's heart ache with tenderness. But sleeping, she still looked impossibly young and vulnerable. Elena showered off the smoke and sweat of the past 48 hours, then crawled into bed with the familiar mixture of exhaustion and relief that came after every shift. She had saved no lives in the past 2 days, only minor medical calls and false alarms, but she had been ready to save lives if necessary. That readiness, that constant state of preparedness, was its own kind of service. As she drifted toward sleep, Elena found herself thinking again about Maria Santos. Was she home with her children now? Were they clinging to her a little tighter, grateful in the way that only comes after nearly losing something precious? Elena imagined Maria tucking her children into bed, kissing their foreheads, whispering prayers of gratitude into the darkness. Elena whispered her own prayer then, a simple request that had become as automatic as breathing. Please keep Sophia safe. Please let me have enough. Please don't let anything happen to her while I'm trying to save other people's families. It was a prayer born from the fundamental contradiction of Elena's life. She spent her days preserving other people's families while constantly worrying about her own. She risked her life to save strangers while knowing that Sophia needed her mother more than any stranger ever could. It was a balance that Elena had never quite mastered, a tension that followed her home after every shift. But it was also who she was. Elena Vasquez, firefighter and mother, protector and provider, strong enough to carry grown adults to safety, but vulnerable enough to cry into her pillow when the weight of responsibility became too much to bear alone. Tomorrow she will wake up and do it all again. Tomorrow there would be more calls, more decisions, more lives hanging in the balance. Tomorrow Sophia would need breakfast and school clothes and help with homework and bedtime stories. Tomorrow the balance would need to be struck again between duty and devotion, between service and survival. Tonight, Elena slept. And across the city, Maria Santos sat at her own kitchen table, surrounded by her own children, writing a letter that would change everything.
The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in mid-October, tucked between a utility bill and a credit card advertisement in Elena's small mailbox at the end of her driveway. The envelope was cream-colored and heavy, with Elena's name and address written in careful script that spoke of someone who still believed in the power of handwritten words. There was no return address, but something about the weight of it in Elena's hands made her pause on the front porch steps, Sophia's abandoned bicycle and scattered chalk drawings forgotten around her feet.
Elena had been struggling with what felt like an escalating series of challenges over the past month. Sophia had come down with strep throat the week before, forcing Elena to miss 2 shifts and scramble to find coverage while caring for her daughter. The missed shifts meant missed pay, and the budget that Elena managed with mathematical precision was suddenly stretched thin. The washing machine had chosen that same week to give up its 20-year battle against Elena's laundry demands, and the estimate for repairs had been almost as much as the machine was worth. Then there was the incident at school. Sophia had been involved in a playground conflict, not her fault according to Mrs. Patterson, but a situation that had required Elena to leave work early for a parent conference. Sitting in the principal's office in her uniform, still smelling of smoke from a morning house fire, Elena had felt the familiar weight of being the only parent in the room. The other child's mother had been there with her husband, a united front of shared responsibility and mutual support. Elena had faced them alone, defending her daughter while simultaneously questioning whether her demanding work schedule was somehow contributing to Sophia's problems. Sometimes children act out when they feel their primary caregiver is unavailable, the school counselor had suggested gently, and Elena felt the comment like a physical blow. She knew the woman meant well, knew she was trying to help, but the implication that Elena's career was somehow damaging Sophia hit all of her deepest fears and insecurities. The fire department was facing its own challenges. Budget cuts had reduced their staffing levels to dangerous minimums, and Elena found herself working longer hours with fewer people. The city council had proposed closing 2 stations to save money, and Elena had spent her days off attending meetings, writing letters, and fighting for resources that shouldn't have to be fought for. How do you explain to politicians who had never run into a burning building that every second mattered, that every cut in personnel was a gamble with other people's lives? Lieutenant Rodriguez had submitted his resignation 2 weeks earlier, accepting a better-paying position with the suburban department that could afford to pay their firefighters a living wage. Elena had supported his decision while mourning the loss of one of her most reliable team members. Good firefighters were leaving the profession faster than they could be replaced, and Elena was watching her brotherhood fracture under the pressure of financial constraints and political indifference. Murphy had been injured in a training accident, a minor knee injury that would sideline him for at least 6 weeks. Chen was dealing with a family crisis that required extended leave. Suddenly, Elena found herself working with rookies and temporary assignments, trying to maintain the same level of service with a constantly changing team. The stress was taking its toll on everyone. Shorter tempers, longer hours, more mistakes that could have been disasters under different circumstances. And underneath all of these professional challenges was the constant, grinding anxiety of single parenthood. Elena lay awake at night running calculations in her head. Could she afford to miss another shift if Sophia got sick again? What would happen to her mortgage if the city council followed through on their threat to implement layoffs? If Elena got injured on the job, how would they survive on workers' compensation? The questions multiplied in the darkness, each one spawning 2 more, until Elena felt like she was drowning in a sea of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. The pressure was affecting her relationship with Sophia in ways that broke Elena's heart. She found herself shorter with her daughter, less patient with the normal chaos of childhood. When Sophia spilled juice on her school clothes one morning, requiring a complete outfit change that made them both late, Elena snapped in a way that left them both tearful and shaken. The look of hurt confusion in Sophia's eyes had haunted Elena for days. "I'm sorry, baby," she had whispered that night as she tucked Sophia into bed. "Mama is just tired. It's not your fault."
But Sophia had hugged her extra tight and said, "It's okay, Mama. I know you're doing your best." The forgiveness in her 8-year-old daughter's voice had made Elena feel both grateful and guilty in equal measure. Now, standing on her front porch with the mysterious letter in her hands, Elena felt the weight of all these accumulated stresses pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had been operating in crisis mode for so long that she had almost forgotten what normal felt like. Every day felt like a battle. Every decision felt like it carried impossible stakes, and she was exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Elena carried the letter inside and set it on her kitchen table next to the bills and forms that seemed to multiply when she wasn't looking. She made coffee with the mechanical precision that had become her default mode, then sat down to face whatever new challenge this letter might represent. Her name was written across the front in that careful script. Captain Elena Vasquez. Not Fire Department or Station 19, but her name specifically. Someone had taken the time to find out who she was, to track down her home address, to reach across the anonymous distance that usually separated rescuers from rescued. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she opened the envelope, and she couldn't have said whether it was from exhaustion, caffeine, or anticipation. The letter was written on the same cream-colored paper as the envelope, the handwriting flowing and deliberate. Elena's eyes went immediately to the signature at the bottom. With endless gratitude, Maria Santos. Her breath caught in her chest as she realized what she was holding. Then she began to read from the beginning, and the world around her seemed too slow and quiet. Dear Captain Vasquez, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Maria Santos, and exactly 23 days ago, you pulled me from the wreckage of my burning apartment building on Roosevelt Avenue. I was unconscious when you found me, and I remained unconscious for 2 days afterward, so I never had the chance to thank you for saving my life. I hope this letter will begin to remedy that oversight. I have started writing this letter a dozen times, and each attempt has ended up in my wastebasket because words feel inadequate to express what I need to say. How do you thank someone for giving you the gift of continuing to exist? How do you convey the magnitude of gratitude for someone who risked their own life so that you could return to yours? I have been a nurse for 12 years, and I have saved lives myself, but I have never been on the receiving end of such a rescue. I never fully understood until now what it means to owe your very existence to the courage of a stranger. But I am writing this letter not just to thank you for saving my life. I am writing to tell you about the life you saved, because I think you deserve to know what your actions that day truly accomplished. You see, Captain Vasquez, when you carried me out of that burning building, you saved more than just one woman. You saved a mother, a daughter, a sister, a nurse, a neighbor, a friend. You saved someone whose existence ripples outward in ways that touch dozens of other lives every single day. My children, Miguel, who is 9, and Isabella, who is 7, they still have their mother because of you. Miguel, who has struggled with anxiety and nightmares since his father left us 3 years ago, still has the one person who can calm his fears and help him find peace in a world that often feels too big and scary for a little boy to navigate. Isabella, who dreams of becoming a firefighter just like you someday, still has someone to encourage those dreams and help her believe that she can be anything she sets her mind to. But let me tell you something about these children that you couldn't have known when you risked your life to save mine. Miguel has autism, and changes in routine can be devastating for him. If I had died in that fire, the disruption to his carefully structured world might have sent him into a spiral that could have taken years to recover from. Isabella has my father's heart condition, a genetic weakness that will require careful monitoring and medical care for the rest of her life. If I had died, she would have been placed with relatives who love her but don't understand her medical needs the way I do. You saved their mother, but you also saved their future. You saved Miguel's sense of security and Isabella's chance at a normal childhood. You saved their education, their stability, their faith that the world is a place where good people do brave things to protect the vulnerable. My patients at St. Mary's Hospital still have their nurse because of you. Yesterday, I held the hand of an elderly man who was dying alone, afraid and confused, and I was able to comfort him
In his final moments because you made sure I survived to be there. Last week, I caught a medication error that could have killed a newborn baby, and that baby will grow up healthy because you gave me the chance to continue doing the work I was called to do. But Captain Vasquez, there is something else I need to tell you. something that makes your rescue even more meaningful than you could have imagined. I was not supposed to be in that apartment when the fire started. I had worked a double shift at the hospital, 16 hours straight in the ICU, and I should have gone directly home to my children. But I had received news that morning that my younger sister, Carmen, was being evicted from her apartment, and she had nowhere else to go. Carmen struggles with addiction, Captain Vasquez. She has been fighting that battle for 7 years now, cycling through treatment programs and relapses, through periods of hope and stretches of despair. She lost her job 6 months ago, fell behind on rent, and was facing life on the streets. As tired as I was after my shift, I couldn't let that happen, so I stopped by her apartment to help her pack her belongings and move them to a storage unit before the eviction could take place. I fell asleep on her couch while she finished gathering her things. The last thing I remember was telling her I would rest for just a few minutes before helping her load the truck. When I woke up 2 days later in the hospital, I learned that Carmen had already left when the fire started. She had gone to check us into a motel for the night, intending to come back for me. If you hadn't found me, if you hadn't risked your life to pull me from that burning building, Carmen would have returned to find her sister dead. Can you imagine the guilt she would have carried for the rest of her life? The belief that her problems had cost me mine? But because of your courage, Captain Vasquez, Carmen and I both survived that day, and something amazing happened in the weeks that followed. Carmen sat by my hospital bed for 48 hours straight, holding my hand and praying for me to wake up. When I finally opened my eyes and saw her face, so full of relief and love and determination, I knew something had changed in her. She told me later that almost losing me had shown her what really mattered, had given her the motivation she needed to get serious about her recovery. Carmen checked herself into a residential treatment program the day I was discharged from the hospital. She has been clean for 3 weeks now, and for the first time in years, I have hope that she might beat this disease. My children have their aunt back, clean and present and working toward a better future. I have my sister back, the woman she was before addiction tried to steal her away from us. You saved Carmen too, Captain Vasquez, even though you never knew she existed. By saving me, you saved her from a guilt that would have destroyed what was left of her spirit. By giving me the chance to survive, you gave her the chance to find her way back to the person she was meant to be. I have been thinking a lot about heroism since the fire, about what it means to be someone who runs toward danger when everyone else is running away. I used to think heroism was about individual acts of courage, about strong people saving weak people, about heroes and victims in clearly defined roles. But I'm beginning to understand that heroism is really about connection, about the recognition that we are all linked to each other in ways we can't always see. When you carried me out of that burning building, you were not just saving a stranger. You were saving a mother whose children needed her, a sister whose sibling was fighting for her life, a nurse whose patients depended on her skills and compassion. You were saving all the people I love and all the people who love me, all the lives that intersect with mine in the beautiful, complicated web of human existence. And Captain Vasquez, I suspect that you understand this connection better than most people, because you are fighting your own battles every day. I asked around at the hospital, and I learned that you are a single mother raising a young daughter while working one of the most dangerous jobs in the city. I learned that you have been with the fire department for 17 years, that you have saved hundreds of lives, that you are respected and admired by everyone who knows your work. But I also learned that you have faced budget cuts and staffing shortages, that you have fought to keep your station open while raising a child largely on your own. I learned that you lost your husband several years ago and have been carrying the weight of parenthood and responsibility without a partner to share the load. I learned that you are someone who gives everything to everyone else and probably rarely takes time to acknowledge your own needs or celebrate your own strength. I am writing this letter because I want you to know that your sacrifice matters, that your courage has created ripples of healing and hope that extend far beyond what you could have imagined. I am writing because I suspect that people in your position, people who dedicate their lives to saving others, don't always understand how much they are appreciated, how much their work means to the people they serve. You saved my life, Captain Vasquez.
But you also saved my children's future, my sister's chance at recovery, my patient's access to care, and my community's faith that there are still people in this world willing to risk everything for strangers. You saved all of this, and you probably drove home that day thinking about the next call, the next emergency, the next person who might need your help. I want you to know that you are not just a firefighter doing her job. You are a guardian angel, a keeper of hope, a living reminder that love is stronger than fear and that courage can triumph over chaos. You are someone whose existence makes the world measurably better, whose presence in this life creates safety and possibility for everyone around you. I know that your work is difficult, that you face challenges and dangers that most people can't imagine. I know that balancing your calling with single motherhood requires sacrifices that go largely unrecognized and unappreciated. I know that there are probably days when you wonder if what you do really matters, if anyone notices or cares about the risks you take to keep other people safe. Please know that it matters. Please know that we notice. Please know that there are people in this city who sleep better at night knowing that you and your colleagues are out there, ready to answer the call when disaster strikes. Please know that your daughter is growing up with a role model who embodies the very best of what human beings can be when they choose service over safety, love over fear. I am including with this letter a small gift, a photo that my children drew for you. Miguel drew a picture of you carrying me out of the fire, and Isabella drew a picture of you with angel wings because she says that's what firefighters really are. They wanted me to tell you that they pray for you every night and that they hope your daughter knows how lucky she is to have a hero for a mother. Captain Vasquez, I will never be able to repay you for what you did for me and my family, but I can promise you this. I will live the life you saved with purpose and gratitude. I will love my children fiercely and raise them to understand the importance of service and sacrifice. I will care for my patients with the knowledge that someone else's courage gave me the chance to continue this work. I will support my sister's recovery with the understanding that second chances are precious gifts, not to be wasted. And whenever I meet someone who questions whether heroes still exist in this world, I will tell them about Captain Elena Vasquez of Station 19, who ran into a burning building to save a stranger, and in doing so, saved an entire constellation of lives that orbit around that stranger's existence. Thank you, Captain Vasquez. Thank you for your courage, your service, your sacrifice, and your strength. Thank you for showing my children what heroism looks like, for giving my sister a chance at redemption, for allowing me to continue the work I love. Thank you for being exactly who you are, exactly when the world needed you to be. With endless gratitude and deepest respect, Maria Santos. P.S. I have one more thing to tell you. Something that I hope will bring you comfort during the difficult moments that I know your job must bring. In the ICU where I work, we have a saying, "Every life saved saves the world." It's a reminder that each person we fight for, each existence we preserve, contains within it infinite possibility and immeasurable worth. You have saved the world 847 times over, Captain Vasquez. Please, never forget that. Elena's hands were shaking by the time she finished reading, and she realized that tears were streaming down her face without her permission. She set the letter down on the kitchen table.
Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. With the careful reverence usually reserved for precious artifacts, then reached for the tissues that she kept on the counter for Sophia's frequent allergy struggles. The emotion hit her in waves: gratitude, validation, recognition, and something deeper that she couldn't quite name. For 17 years, Elena had answered calls and fought fires and saved lives, but the people she rescued usually disappeared into the machinery of hospitals and insurance claims and life moving forward. She rarely learned their names, almost never discovered what happened to them after the ambulance doors closed. The work had become abstract in some ways, a series of statistics and reports, rather than human stories with continuing chapters. But Maria's letter had pulled back the curtain on what rescue actually meant, and had shown Elena the true scope of what happened when someone's life was preserved. It wasn't just about pulling one unconscious woman from a burning building. It was about allowing 2 children to keep their mother, helping an addicted sister find motivation for recovery, ensuring that patients at St. Mary's continued to receive care from an experienced nurse. It was about preserving not just a life, but an entire network of relationships and responsibilities and possibilities. Elena read the letter again, more slowly this time, letting each word sink in. Maria had taken the time to research Elena's personal situation, to understand the challenges she faced as a single mother in a demanding profession. She had seen Elena not just as a uniformed first responder, but as a complete human being with her own struggles and sacrifices. The recognition felt like a gift that Elena hadn't known she needed. The drawings from Maria's children were tucked into the envelope, simple crayon sketches that showed Elena carrying her mother to safety, complete with flames and smoke and a firefighter with angel wings. Isabella had written, "Thank you, Captain Elena," in shaky block letters across the bottom of her drawing. And Miguel had drawn himself and his sister holding hands next to a picture of their reunited family. Elena found herself crying harder as she studied the children's artwork. These were the faces she thought about when she ran into burning buildings, the innocence she was fighting to preserve, the futures she was working to protect. Miguel and Isabella Santos had no idea that their simple drawings would mean more to Elena than any official commendation or newspaper article. Their gratitude was pure and uncomplicated, free from the politics and budget battles that too often overshadowed the real purpose of the work. The letter had arrived at exactly the moment when Elena needed it most. After weeks of feeling like she was failing at everything, as a firefighter, as a mother, as a person trying to hold her life together with insufficient resources and too little support, Maria's words reminded her of why she had chosen this life in the first place. Not for the pay, which was inadequate, or the recognition, which was rare, but for moments like the one she had shared with Maria Santos in that burning building. Elena thought about all the other rescue calls that had blurred together over the years, all the unconscious faces she had carried to safety without ever learning their names or stories. How many Marias had there been? How many children like Miguel and Isabella? How many families preserved? How many futures protected? How many networks of love and connection maintained because Elena and her colleagues had been willing to run toward danger instead of away from it? The letter was validation, but it was also a reminder of responsibility. Maria was right. Elena's work rippled outward in ways she rarely considered. Every life she saved contained within it the potential to save other lives, to create art, to love and be loved, to make the world measurably better through simple existence. The weight of that responsibility could be overwhelming, but it was also profoundly meaningful. Elena carefully folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope, then put it in the drawer where she kept important documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, the deed to the house. This letter belonged with those precious papers, evidence of a life well lived and work that mattered. She looked at the clock and realized that Sophia would be home from school in 30 minutes. Elena had planned to spend the afternoon catching up on laundry and grocery shopping, but suddenly those tasks seemed less urgent. Instead, she found herself wanting to call the fire station, to check on her crew, to remind herself why she had chosen this difficult, dangerous, necessary work.
But first, she wanted to hug her daughter. She wanted to look into Sophia's eyes and see the future that Elena was working so hard to protect. She wanted to remember that her own life was just as precious as the one she saved, that her own story mattered just as much as Maria Santos' story, that the love between mother and daughter was worth every sacrifice and every risk. Elena wiped her eyes and started preparing Sophia's after-school snack, but her movements were lighter now, her heart fuller than it had been in weeks. She had been reminded that heroism wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about showing up when you were needed, about doing the right thing even when it was difficult, about believing that every life was worth saving, including her own. When Sophia burst through the front door 20 minutes later, chattering about a spelling test and a friend's lost tooth, Elena swept her daughter into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "What's that for?" Sophia asked, but she was smiling, always happy to receive extra affection from her mother. "Just because I love you," Elena replied, breathing in the familiar scent of childhood and possibility. "And because someone reminded me today that love is the strongest force in the world." Sophia nodded, as if this made perfect sense, then launched into a detailed account of her day while Elena listened with the full attention that Maria's letter had reminded her it was one of the most precious gifts she could give. Outside, the October sun was setting earlier each day, but inside Elena's small house on Maple Street, the light felt brighter than it had in months. Elena read Maria's letter 3 more times over the following week, each reading revealing new layers of meaning that she had missed before. She carried the envelope with her in her gear bag, pulling it out during quiet moments at the station to study Isabella's drawing of the firefighter with angel wings, or to reread Miguel's careful note, thanking her for saving my mama and making her come home. The letter had shifted something fundamental in Elena's perspective, but it had also created a restlessness that she couldn't quite define. For 17 years, she had operated under the assumption that her job was to save lives and move on, to maintain professional distance and emotional boundaries that would allow her to function in crisis situations without becoming overwhelmed by the human stories behind each call. But Maria's letter had shown her the ripple effects of her work in ways that made those boundaries feel artificial and limiting. Elena found herself thinking about all the other people she had rescued over the years, wondering about their stories, their families, their recoveries. She remembered the elderly woman she had pulled from a car accident 5 years earlier. Had she graduated from high school? Was she in college now, pursuing dreams that might never have existed if not for that rescue? There was the elderly woman she had carried down a ladder during an apartment fire. Had she seen her grandchildren grow up? Had she celebrated birthdays and holidays that wouldn't have happened without her intervention? These questions followed Elena through her days, coloring routine tasks with new significance. During equipment checks, she found herself thinking about the lives that might depend on the proper functioning of each tool. During training exercises, she imagined the faces of people not yet rescued, families not yet preserved, futures not yet protected. The abstract nature of emergency preparedness had become intensely personal, and Elena wasn't sure how to process the emotional weight of that transformation. The change was noticed by her crew at Station 19. Rodriguez, who had returned from his injury leave the previous week, commented on Elena's increased intensity during drills. "You've been pushing us harder lately, Cap. Everything okay?" Elena hesitated, unsure how to explain the impact of Maria's letter without sounding overly sentimental. "Just remembering why we do this job," she said finally. "Sometimes we get caught up in the routine and forget that every call matters to someone." Murphy, who had known Elena longer than anyone else in the crew, studied her with the perceptive eyes of someone who had learned to read people's emotional states in crisis situations. "You've been different since that apartment fire on Roosevelt. The nurse you pulled out, did something happen with that case?"
Elena found herself pulling the letter from her bag, handling it with the careful reverence it had earned over the past week. "She wrote to me," Elena said simply. "The woman I rescued. She told me about her life, about what the rescue meant to her family." The crew gathered around as Elena shared selected portions of Maria's letter, reading aloud the parts about Miguel and Isabella, about Carmen's recovery, about the patients who continued to receive care because their nurse had survived. She watched their faces as the words sank in, saw the same recognition she had experienced, that their work extended far beyond the immediate moment of rescue, that every life they saved contained infinite possibility and connection. "Jesus," whispered Chen, the youngest member of the crew. "I never thought about it like that. All the people we've never met who benefit from the people we save." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "My grandfather always said that when you save a life, you become responsible for all the good that person does afterward. I thought it was just an old-fashioned saying, but maybe he was onto something." Elena carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. "It made me realize that we don't always understand the impact of what we do," she said. "We see the emergency, we handle the crisis, we move on to the next call. But the people we save go back to lives full of relationships and responsibilities and possibilities that continue long after we've forgotten their names." The conversation was interrupted by an alarm, a structure fire in an industrial district that required all hands. As they rolled out of the station, Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and purpose that had sustained her through 17 years of emergency response. But now there was something additional, a deeper awareness of what was at stake beyond the immediate crisis. The fire was in a textile factory that had been converted into artist studios, and the call had come in during evening hours when many of the artists were still working. Elena and her crew arrived to find a complex situation. Multiple people trapped on upper floors, narrow stairwells filled with smoke, and valuable artwork that the building's occupants were reluctant to leave behind. Elena established command and began coordinating the rescue operation with the methodical precision that had become second nature. But as she watched her crew enter the burning building, she found herself thinking not just about the immediate victims, but about all the lives that would be affected by each successful rescue. The sculptor they pulled from the third floor. How many students did he teach? How many people would never see the artwork he might create if they didn't get him out safely? The photographer rescued from her studio. What moments would she capture in the future that might change how people saw the world? The operation was successful. 7 people rescued, no serious injuries, property damage contained to the lower floors. But as Elena watched the survivors reunite with family members who had gathered on the street, she saw Maria's letter playing out in real time. Children hugging parents they had almost lost, spouses clinging to each other with the desperate relief of near-miss tragedy, and friends and colleagues gathering around the rescued artist with expressions of gratitude and amazement. Elena noticed an elderly woman standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the reunion with tears streaming down her face. Something about her posture, the way she held herself apart while clearly being deeply affected by the scene, drew Elena's attention. "Excuse me," Elena said, approaching the woman gently. "Are you all right? Do you know someone who was in the building?" The woman looked up at Elena with eyes that held depths of emotion and experience. "My son," she said simply. "James Morrison. He's the sculptor you pulled from the third floor." Elena glanced toward the crowd and saw a man in his 40s being examined by paramedics, his face streaked with soot but his eyes alert and grateful. "He's going to be fine," Elena assured the woman. "The paramedics are just being cautious." "You don't understand," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "James has been battling depression for the past 2 years. His art is the only thing that keeps him going, the only thing that gives his life meaning. If he had lost his studio, if his work had been destroyed—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought.
Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest as she recognized another layer of consequence, another ripple effect that extended beyond the immediate rescue. "But he didn't lose it," she said gently. "He's safe, and his work is safe." The woman reached out and grasped Elena's hand with surprising strength. "You saved more than his life tonight," she said. "You saved his reason for living. You saved my hope of seeing my son find his way back to happiness. You saved our family from a loss that would have destroyed us all." Elena squeezed the woman's hands in return, feeling the weight and privilege of that moment. "That's what we're here for," she said, though the words felt inadequate to express the profound connection she was experiencing. As the woman walked toward her son, Elena found herself thinking about all the mothers she had comforted over the years, all the families she had helped preserve, all the reasons for living that had been protected by her work and the work of her colleagues. The abstract concept of saving lives had become intensely personal, populated with faces and names and stories that extended far beyond the emergency scene. The following week brought a series of revelations that further transformed Elena's understanding of her work and its impact. She received a phone call from St. Mary's Hospital. Maria Santos wanted to meet her in person, to introduce her children and thank Elena face to face. Elena hesitated at first, unsure whether breaking the professional boundary between rescuer and rescued was wise, but something in Maria's voice convinced her to agree. They met at a small cafe near the hospital, and Elena recognized Maria immediately, despite the fact that she had only seen her unconscious and covered in soot. Maria was petite and graceful, with dark hair that she wore pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that radiated warmth and intelligence. With her were Miguel and Isabella, exactly as Elena had imagined them from their drawings. Miguel serious and thoughtful, and Isabella bouncing with barely contained energy. "Captain Vasquez," Maria said, rising from her chair as Elena approached their table. "I can't believe you came. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet us." Elena felt unexpectedly emotional as she shook Maria's hand, remembering the weight of carrying this woman's unconscious form through smoke and flame. "Please, call me Elena, and thank you for your letter. It meant more to me than I can express." Miguel and Isabella hung back shyly at first, but gradually warmed up as Elena asked them about school and their interests. Isabella announced that she still wanted to be a firefighter when she grew up, just like Captain Elena. And Miguel quietly presented Elena with a new drawing, this one showing Elena and Sofia together, based on a description Maria had given him. "Miguel has been drawing firefighters nonstop since the rescue. I think you've inspired a future artist," Maria said with a smile. As they talked over coffee and hot chocolate, Elena learned more about Maria's life and work. She was a charge nurse in the ICU, responsible for some of the hospital's most critical patients. She had been a single mother for 3 years, ever since her ex-husband had left them for another woman, and she supported her children entirely on her nursing salary, while also helping to care for her recovering sister, Carmen. "It's not easy," Maria admitted during a quiet moment when the children were occupied with coloring books. "Being the only parent, being responsible for everything. But I imagine you understand that better than most people." Elena nodded, feeling a kinship with this woman that went beyond their shared experience of rescue. "Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water, trying to be everything to everyone, never feeling like I'm enough for any of it." "But you are enough," Maria said with quiet conviction. "You're more than enough. You saved my life so that I could continue being a mother to my children, a nurse to my patients, a sister to Carmen. You enabled all of that by being exactly who you are, exactly when we needed you." Isabella looked up from her coloring book and announced, "My mama says you're a real-life superhero. She says superheroes don't wear capes, they wear uniforms and help people when they're scared."
Elena felt tears pricking at her eyes as she looked at this little girl who saw the world in such clear, simple terms. "Your mama is pretty brave too," Elena said. "Taking care of people when they're sick is a very important job." After an hour of conversation, Elena realized that meeting Maria and her children had completed something that had been left unfinished by the rescue itself. She had seen the human faces behind the emergency call, had witnessed the love and connection that her actions had preserved. The abstract concept of saving lives now had specific names and personalities attached to it. As they prepared to leave, Maria pulled Elena aside for a private moment. "I want you to know that Carmen has been clean for 2 months now," she said quietly. "She starts a new job next week, part-time at first, but it's a step toward rebuilding her life. She asked me to tell you that she prays for you every night, that she considers you the person who saved her family." Elena felt overwhelmed by the interconnectedness of it all.
how one rescue had rippled outward to affect not just Maria, but her children, her sister, her patients, and probably dozens of other people whose lives intersected with theirs in ways that could never be fully mapped or understood. That evening, as Elena tucked Sophia into bed, her daughter asked about the meeting. "Did you like meeting the lady you saved?" "I did," Elena replied, smoothing Sophia's dark curls against her pillow. "She has 2 children, just like I imagined from their drawings. They're very brave kids, and they love their mama very much." "Just like I love you," Sophia said, with the casual certainty that children brought to declarations of love. "Just like I love you," Elena agreed, kissing her daughter's forehead and breathing in the familiar scent of childhood and safety. Over the next several days, Elena found herself sharing the story of her meeting with Maria with her colleagues, her neighbors, even Mrs. Patterson, who listened with the engaged attention of someone who understood the significance of unexpected connections. Each telling deepened Elena's appreciation for the complex web of relationships and responsibilities that surrounded every emergency call. The recognition of this complexity was changing how Elena approached her work. During medical calls, she found herself wondering about the families waiting at home. During fire rescues, she thought about the communities that would be affected by each successful save. The work had become more personal, more meaningful, but also more emotionally demanding. Elena began keeping a different kind of record in her notebook. Alongside the names and basic facts of each rescue, she started adding questions. What dreams might this person pursue? What families depend on them? What contributions might they make to their community? The questions were impossible to answer completely, but they served as reminders that every emergency call was really about preserving possibility and potential. The shift in Elena's perspective was noticed not just by her crew, but by the community they served. During a routine school visit, part of Fire Prevention Week, Elena found herself speaking more passionately about the importance of fire safety, connecting prevention measures to the protection of families and futures rather than just property and statistics. One teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, no relation to Elena's lieutenant, approached her after the presentation. "I've never heard a firefighter speak about the work the way you did today," she said. "You made it sound like every life saved was a victory for the entire community." "Because it is," Elena replied without hesitation. "Every person we save goes back to a life full of connections and responsibilities and possibilities. When we preserve one life, we preserve all of that potential." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "My husband is a police officer, and he struggles sometimes with feeling like his work doesn't make a real difference. I think he'd benefit from hearing your perspective." That conversation led to Elena being invited to speak at a conference for first responders, where she shared Maria's story and her own evolving understanding of what it meant to save lives. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and emergency room nurses approached her afterward to share their own stories of unexpected connections with the people they had helped. Elena realized that she wasn't the only one who had been operating under the assumption that professional distance was necessary for effective emergency response. Many of her colleagues had their own versions of Maria's letter, thank you notes, chance encounters, follow-up meetings that had revealed the true scope of their impact. But these stories were rarely shared, rarely celebrated, rarely used to understand the profound meaning of the work they all did. The conference presentation led to requests for Elena to speak at other events, a graduation ceremony at the Fire Academy, a fundraising dinner for the Hospital Foundation, a community forum on emergency preparedness. Each speaking opportunity allowed Elena to share the message that had emerged from her experience with Maria, that emergency responders weren't just treating symptoms or managing crises, they were preserving the entire, complicated, beautiful web of human connection and possibility. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source.
Sophia's school was conducting interviews with community helpers for a class project, and Sophia had insisted that her mother be interviewed as the representative firefighter. Elena had expected routine questions about equipment and training, but the teacher conducting the interview had done her homework. "Mrs. Vasquez," the teacher said, using Elena's formal name for the recording, "we understand that you recently received a letter from someone whose life you saved. Can you tell us what that letter meant to you?" Elena looked at the camera and thought about all the ways her understanding of her work had evolved over the past months. "That letter reminded me that when we save someone's life, we're not just preserving one person. We're preserving all the love they give and receive, all the work they do, all the ways they make their community better. Every life contains infinite possibility, and our job is to protect that possibility so it can continue to unfold." The interview was broadcast during the school's morning announcements, and Elena later learned that it had been shared with the district's other schools as an example of community service and civic responsibility. Sophia beamed with pride as her classmates congratulated her on having such an inspiring mother, and Elena felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that her daughter was learning to see service as both privilege and responsibility. That evening, as Elena was cleaning up from dinner, Sophia announced, "Mama, I want to write a letter too." "To who, sweetheart?" "To Isabella and Miguel. I want to tell them that their mama is a hero too, because she takes care of sick people and helps them get better." Elena felt her heart expand as she realized that the ripple effects of connection and recognition were continuing to spread. Sophia was learning that heroism came in many forms, that the courage to care for others was just as valuable as the courage to rescue them. As Elena helped Sophia compose her letter to Maria's children, she marveled at how one act of rescue had created this expanding circle of connection and understanding. Maria's original letter had opened Elena's eyes to the true scope of her work's impact. Meeting Maria and her children had put human faces on the abstract concept of saving lives, and now Sophia was learning to recognize the heroism in everyday acts of service and care. The letter-writing session led to a deeper conversation about the different ways people help each other in their community. Elena found herself describing not just the dramatic rescues that made headlines, but the daily acts of service that held their neighborhood together. Teachers like Mrs. Patterson, who went beyond their job descriptions to help families in need. Nurses like Maria, who comforted frightened patients. Neighbors who checked on elderly residents during storms. "It's like a big web," Sophia observed with 8-year-old wisdom. "Everyone helps everyone else, and when someone helps one person, it helps lots of people." Elena hugged her daughter close, amazed by how clearly children could see truths that adults often complicated with professional boundaries and emotional barriers. "That's exactly right, mija. We're all connected to each other, and when we take care of each other, we make the whole community stronger." Over the following weeks, Elena noticed that her changed perspective was affecting every aspect of her work. During routine inspections of local businesses, she found herself thinking not just about fire code compliance, but about the employees whose livelihoods depended on those businesses staying safe and operational. During training exercises, she emphasized to her crew the human impact of their technical skills. Every properly executed rescue technique was someone's father coming home, someone's mother surviving to see her children grow up, someone's sibling getting a second chance at life. The transformation was subtle but profound. Elena still maintained the professional competence and emotional steadiness that had made her an effective captain for 17 years. But now there was an additional layer of meaning to everything she did, a deeper understanding of the stakes involved in emergency response. This new awareness was tested during a particularly challenging call in late November. A 3-alarm fire at a senior living facility required the coordination of multiple departments and the evacuation of nearly 60 elderly residents, many of whom required assistance walking or were confined to wheelchairs. Elena found herself thinking not just about the logistics of the evacuation, but about the life stories represented by each person they helped to safety. The elderly man who insisted on going back for his late wife's wedding ring, Elena understood that they weren't just saving his life, but preserving his connection to 60 years of marriage and love. The woman who clutched a photo album during the evacuation, Elena recognized that those pictures represented not just memories, but proof of a life well lived and relationships cherished. The retired teacher who worried about her cat, Elena knew that pet represented companionship and purpose for someone who might otherwise feel forgotten by the world. Each successful evacuation felt like a victory not just for emergency response protocols, but for the continuation of human dignity and connection. Elena watched families arrive to collect their elderly relatives, witnessed the tears of relief and gratitude, and saw the way a crisis could bring out both vulnerability and strength in equal measure. After the fire was contained and all residents were safely relocated to temporary housing, Elena was approached by the facility's director, a woman named Sandra Collins, who had worked in elder care for over 20 years. "Captain Vasquez," Sandra said, her voice thick with emotion, "I wanted to thank you personally for how your team handled this evacuation. You treated our residents with such dignity and care. I could see that you understood these weren't just elderly people to be moved to safety. They were individuals with stories and relationships and possessions that mattered to them." Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came when someone recognized the deeper meaning of her work. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect during their most vulnerable moments. Age and circumstances don't change someone's fundamental worth. Sandra nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I've been doing this work for 2 decades, and I've seen how easy it is for people to forget that our residents are complete human beings with rich histories and important relationships. What you and your team did today, taking time to help Mr. Patterson find his wife's ring, making sure Mrs. Chen could bring her photo albums, allowing Ms. Rodriguez to say goodbye to her cat before we had to leave him with animal control, those small acts of kindness meant everything to them." That night, Elena found herself adding detailed notes to her rescue log, recording not just the basic facts of the evacuation, but the personal details that had made each rescue meaningful. She wrote about Mr. Patterson's wedding ring, about Mrs. Chen's photo albums, about Ms. Rodriguez's cat, and the promise Elena had made to personally ensure the animal was cared for until other arrangements could be made. The senior center fire had reinforced Elena's growing understanding that emergency response was as much about preserving dignity and humanity as it was about preserving life. The technical skills and physical courage were just the beginning. The real work was recognizing the complete person behind each emergency call and responding to their needs with both competence and compassion.
Improve, but also, what did we learn about the people we helped? And how can we better serve the human needs alongside the emergency needs? The questions initially puzzled some of the newer recruits, who had been trained to focus on technical protocols and operational efficiency. But gradually, Elena began to see a shift in how her crew approached their work. They started taking extra time to comfort frightened children during medical calls. They began asking elderly residents if there was anything special they needed to retrieve from their homes during evacuations. They learned to recognize that behind every emergency call was a complete human story, deserving of respect and care. Rodriguez, who had initially been skeptical of what he saw as Elena's increasing sentimentality, came to embrace this more holistic approach to emergency response. "You know, Cap," he said during a quiet moment at the station, "I used to think our job was just about putting out fires and saving lives. But watching how you've been approaching things lately, I'm starting to understand that we're really in the business of preserving everything that makes people human." Elena smiled at his insight. "It took me 17 years to figure that out," she admitted. "Sometimes it takes a letter from someone whose life you've saved to help you understand what you've really been doing all along." The impact of Elena's evolving philosophy extended beyond her immediate crew to the broader fire department. Other captains began incorporating similar approaches into their training programs, emphasizing the importance of treating rescue subjects with dignity and recognizing the human complexity behind every emergency call. The department's community relations improved as residents began to feel that firefighters saw them as complete individuals rather than just problems to be solved. Elena was invited to present her philosophy at the State Firefighters Conference, where her talk on preserving humanity in emergency response was met with standing ovations and requests for follow-up training sessions. She found herself becoming an advocate for a more holistic approach to emergency services, one that recognized the emotional and psychological needs of people in crisis alongside their immediate physical needs. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Elena received a call from St. Mary's Hospital asking if she would be willing to participate in a special ceremony. The hospital was establishing an annual award for community heroes, and Maria Santos had nominated Elena to be the first recipient. "I can't think of anyone more deserving," Maria explained when she called Helena personally. "Your letter changed not just my life, but the way I think about service and connection. The hospital board wants to recognize people who exemplify the values we're trying to promote: compassion, courage, and recognition of the fundamental worth of every human being." Elena was deeply moved by the nomination, but what struck her most was Maria's reference to "your letter." Elena had only received a letter from Maria. She had never written one in return. When she mentioned this to Maria, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "Elena," Maria said softly, "every day that I wake up and care for my children, every patient I comfort in the ICU, every moment I spend supporting my sister's recovery, that's my letter to you. That's my way of saying thank you for giving me the chance to continue living and loving and serving. We all write letters with our lives, and you made it possible for me to keep writing mine." The impact of Elena's insight hit her with unexpected force. She had been thinking about Maria's written letter as a unique and isolated gesture, but Maria was right. Everyone whose life had been preserved by Elena's work was writing a continuing letter of gratitude through the way they lived their days. Every morning that Miguel and Isabella woke up with their mother nearby, every patient who received care from Maria's skilled hands, every step forward in Carmen's recovery, all of it was part of an ongoing conversation between Elena's service and the lives she had touched. Elena accepted the hospital's award, not because she craved recognition, but because she understood that accepting it would give her a platform to share the message that had transformed her own understanding of emergency response. At the ceremony, held in the hospital's main auditorium with an audience of medical professionals, first responders, and community members, Elena spoke about the interconnectedness of service and the responsibility that came with preserving human life. When we save someone's life, we're not just preventing death. We're preserving all the love that person gives and receives, all the work they do, all the ways they make their community better. We're protecting the future chapters of their story and the stories of everyone whose life intersects with theirs. In the audience, Elena could see Maria sitting with her children, Carmen beside them, looking healthy and hopeful, and several other people Elena recognized from various rescue calls over the years. The sight of these faces, people whose lives had been preserved and who had gone on to live and love and contribute to their community, filled Elena with a profound sense of purpose and gratitude. After the ceremony, several audience members approached Elena to share their own stories of rescue and recovery, of second chances and preserved possibilities. A man who had been pulled from a car accident 5 years earlier introduced Elena to his young daughter, born 3 years after the crash. A woman who had survived a house fire brought her new husband, whom she had met during her recovery process. An elderly man who had been rescued during a medical emergency at a shopping mall presented Elena with a photo of his grandson's graduation, an event he had lived to see because of Elena's intervention. Each story reinforced Elena's growing understanding that rescue work was really about preserving the infinite possibility contained within every human life.
She had always known intellectually that saving lives was important work, but now she understood viscerally that every successful rescue was a victory for hope, love, connection, and the fundamental human capacity for growth and change. Fire Captain Elena Vasquez had served for 17 years with competence and dedication when a letter written on cream-colored paper arrived that would transform her understanding of what it meant to save a life. The letter came from Maria Santos, a nurse and single mother whom Elena had rescued from an apartment fire on Roosevelt Avenue. What began as a simple thank you note evolved into something far more profound. A revelation about the ripple effects of service and the interconnected nature of human lives. Maria's letter didn't merely express gratitude for the rescue, it painted a vivid picture of what preservation of her life actually meant. She described how being saved allowed her to continue caring for her children, Miguel and Isabella, and to keep working as a nurse, helping other patients heal. The letter revealed that Elena hadn't just prevented a death, she had preserved an entire constellation of relationships, responsibilities, and future contributions to the community. Initially, Elena had maintained a professional distance she believed was necessary for emotional survival in emergency response work. She was skilled, brave, and dedicated, but she saw her job in narrow terms, responding to calls, preserving life, and moving to the next emergency. Maria's letter shattered this limited perspective and opened Elena's eyes to the broader human impact of rescue work. The transformation began personally, but quickly extended to Elena's approach to leadership at Station 19. She started encouraging her crew, Rodriguez, Murphy, Chen, and others, to understand their work differently. Rather than maintaining strict professional boundaries, Elena helped them see that meaningful connections with the people they served could enhance rather than compromise their effectiveness. This philosophical shift had practical implications. Elena's crew began following up with rescue survivors when appropriate, building relationships that provided deeper meaning to their work while also strengthening community connections. They discovered that understanding the full human context of their rescues made them more motivated, more fulfilled, and ultimately more effective firefighters. Elena's 9-year-old daughter, Sofia, absorbed these lessons about service and connection. Growing up in an environment where emergency response was understood as community building rather than just crisis management, Sofia developed sophisticated insights about civic responsibility and human interconnectedness. She became an articulate spokesperson for these values, speaking to school groups and community forums about how individual actions could ripple outward to strengthen entire communities. Sofia's understanding that when someone helps one person, they're really helping everyone because we're all connected to each other, demonstrated how these values could be transmitted to the next generation. Her childhood exposure to this philosophy of service prepared her for future leadership roles, regardless of her eventual career path.
The rescue's impact on the Santos family exemplified the letter's central message about preserved lives, writing their own letters of gratitude through their choices and contributions. Maria continued excelling as a nurse while raising her children with strength and grace. Miguel developed artistic talents that evolved into a passion for architectural design, specifically focusing on building safety and fire prevention. Isabella maintained her dream of becoming a firefighter, eventually pursuing emergency management studies. Most significantly, Maria's sister, Carmen, who had been struggling with substance abuse, was inspired by the rescue to begin recovery. Carmen's successful sobriety led her to become a substance abuse counselor, helping others while also training first responders to provide more compassionate care to people dealing with addiction and mental health challenges. This demonstrated how one rescue could create multiple generations of healing and service. Elena's evolved understanding of emergency response began attracting attention beyond Station 19. Her approach to training new firefighters, emphasizing the human dimension alongside technical competence, became a model for other departments. She developed a curriculum called The Human Dimension of Emergency Response that combined traditional training with education about trauma-informed care, cultural sensitivity, and the psychological aspects of rescue work. The success of this approach led to Elena being invited to speak at conferences and training events across the state. Her message that compassionate service could enhance rather than compromise professional effectiveness resonated with first responders who had experienced meaningful connections with people they had served but had felt uncertain about acknowledging these relationships. Elena's speaking engagements revealed that her experience wasn't unique. First responders across the country had similar stories of meaningful connections with rescue survivors. This led to a broader movement within emergency services, emphasizing the importance of treating every call as an opportunity to preserve human dignity alongside human life. The philosophy that grew from Maria's letter began influencing policy at multiple levels. Station 19 became a model for other departments, leading to increased funding for community outreach programs and policy changes that gave first responders more time and resources to follow up with people they served. Elena was promoted to battalion chief and eventually to chief, allowing her to implement these values on a larger scale. The approach spread beyond fire services to police departments, paramedic services, and hospitals. Dr. Sarah Chen, the emergency room physician who had treated Maria, collaborated with Elena to develop training programs for medical professionals that emphasized seeing patients as complete human beings with complex lives and relationships rather than just medical cases. Elena's story was featured in a documentary titled Letters from the Rescued, which explored the human side of emergency response through interviews with first responders and the people whose lives they had saved. The documentary premiered at the State Firefighters Conference and was later broadcast on public television, inspiring viewers across the country. The film's impact extended internationally, with Elena receiving emails from firefighters in other countries who had been inspired to develop deeper connections with the people they served. This created a global network of emergency responders committed to preserving not just life, but human dignity and community connection. Over the following decades, the values that emerged from Maria's letter continued to influence emergency response training and culture. Elena's training methods became standard practice throughout the state and were adopted by departments in other states and countries. The philosophy of preserving not just life, but human dignity and community connection became central to modern emergency response training. Sophia, inspired by her childhood exposure to these values, built a career in emergency management, working to make emergency preparedness more responsive to community needs and more inclusive of diverse perspectives. Her work focused particularly on ensuring that emergency plans strengthened rather than disrupted the social networks that helped communities weather crises. Maria Santos became a respected architect, specializing in public buildings that prioritized both safety and community connection. His firm designed new fire stations that incorporated community meeting spaces alongside traditional emergency response facilities. Isabella Santos fulfilled her childhood dream of becoming a firefighter, eventually becoming fire chief of a neighboring county where she implemented training programs that emphasized community connection alongside technical competence.
Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Carmen Rivera Santos became director of the region's largest substance abuse treatment center, celebrated for her innovative approaches to addiction treatment and recovery support. Her work demonstrated how understanding community interconnectedness could transform approaches to social problems, turning challenges into opportunities for collective healing. 25 years after the original rescue, Elena's influence was visible throughout the emergency response community.
The training programs she had developed were used internationally. The philosophy of compassionate rescue work had become standard practice. Young first responders were trained from the beginning to see their work as community building, rather than just crisis response. Elena's approach had also influenced broader conversations about community resilience and social connection. She served on task forces addressing homelessness, mental health, disaster preparedness, and community development, always bringing the perspective that individual welfare and community well-being were inseparable. At Elena's retirement after 37 years of service, representatives from countless organizations and communities gathered to honor her contributions. The memorial dedication in the city park featured a bronze sculpture of hands reaching toward each other, symbolizing the interconnectedness that Elena's philosophy had helped the community understand. The motto engraved around the memorial's base, "Every life saved saves the world," captured the essence of what Maria's letter had taught Elena about the far-reaching impact of individual service. The ceremony was attended not just by first responders, but by representatives from hospitals, schools, social service organizations, and community groups that had been influenced by Elena's understanding of service as community building. Elena's legacy lived not in any single achievement, but in the daily choices made by thousands of people who had learned to see their individual actions as contributions to collective well-being. Young first responders trained in the philosophy of compassionate service continued responding to emergencies with understanding of their role as community builders. Emergency management professionals developed policies that strengthened social connections alongside operational capabilities. The letter that started it all, Maria's expression of gratitude written on cream-colored paper, remained carefully preserved in Elena's desk drawer alongside 25 subsequent annual letters documenting the ongoing impact of that single rescue. But the real legacy lived in the understanding that had spread throughout the community, that individual service and community well-being were inseparable, and that the courage to care deeply about others was the foundation upon which all meaningful service was built. Maria's letter had revealed a fundamental truth about emergency response work that had always existed but had rarely been articulated. When first responders save a life, they preserve not just physical existence, but an entire network of relationships, contributions, and future possibilities. They protect the love that person gives and receives, the work they do, the ways they strengthen their community, and the positive influence they have on future generations. This understanding transformed emergency response from a series of individual rescue operations into recognition of a larger mission, preserving and protecting everything that makes communities strong, the relationships, connections, and mutual care that allow societies to thrive. Elena learned that every life saved was indeed a victory for hope, love, and the fundamental human capacity for connection and service.